Hello and welcome to CIMA Australia's exam preparation series. My name is Cliff Bowles and I'll be the presenter of this series of films which is to help you prepare for your exams. In this first film, Preparing for Your Exams, we're going to look at three parts: a general preparation for exams. We're going to look specifically at the new version of objective tests, and we're going to look at how we might prepare to take a case study exam. CIMA exams have long been regarded as being more challenging and stressful than those experienced at a university. And one of the reasons is because you have a lot riding on them, as success in passing and qualifying as a CMA opens the door for your professional career. But too many candidates go into their exams prepared and confident, but fail to achieve the result they expect, and it's sometimes because of poor exam techniques and poor discipline. Being able to answer questions under intense pressure when you're feeling stressed is quite different from your normal study environment. So let's have a look at some of the reasons CMA examiners have identified for student failure. The first one is poor preparation. They simply haven't prepared themselves for the exam. Poor time management. They haven't effectively managed their time in an exam. And failure to read questions properly. Failure to read the questions correctly, or failure to understand the question. But equally, the examiners have also identified why some students succeed. Successful students effectively analyze information to the requirements of the question. They specifically answer the question than just merely providing information around the topic of the question. They use their study materials effectively and efficiently, and here we're talking about an open book environment, of course. They read carefully and they understand the question before they start the answer. And they effectively manage their time throughout the exam. Let's have a quick word about open book exams. Open book exams test your knowledge or test your understanding of the material that you've studied rather than recall and memory, requiring you to apply the knowledge rather than just remembering facts. They test your ability to find and use information for problem solving and to deliver well-structured and well-presented arguments. There are a couple of myths about open book exams that we need to address. Some people think having an open book exam is an easy option. I don't think this is true. Answering the questions well obviously requires much more than copying information straight from a textbook. For example, having access to a textbook can stop you from giving the wrong answer if you can't remember a fact or a formula, but just getting the fact correct won't get you good marks. In open book exams, it's how you locate, how you apply, and how you use the information that's important. Some people also think the more material the better, and candidates tend to get carried away and take too many materials and resources into the exam. My advice is don't overload yourself with materials. Only take what you really need to reference in an exam. Too many materials can end up distracting you and crowding up your workspace. 2015 has heralded the arrival for online exams, objective exams for CIMA students. And doing online exams does require a different technique compared to the traditional paper-based method. It's really important that you are familiar with using the objective test software before you sit for your exam. Don't go into the exam cold. That means don't be unfamiliar with the software and how it works. And even if you've done it before, make sure you download the practice software from CIMA, refresh your knowledge and skills on how it's used. Don't wait until the exam to learn how to use the online calculator, for example, or how to access tables, net present value tables. You can lose valuable time trying to do these things in the exam. Do it beforehand. Experience and practice your technique before the exam. Don't leave it until the day before. One of the biggest issues for students is the failure to maintain time discipline in an exam. And it's essential that you stick to it no matter what. Don't get stuck or hijacked by a single question. It can cost you far more than its allocated marks. Make sure you take a good watch into the exam. Don't rely on the clock in the exam room. That could go wrong. It could fail. It could be fast. It could be slow. Take a good watch with you. Place it in front of you on your desk and continuously look at it to pace yourself. It's important also to develop a time strategy. For example, aim to finish 5 minutes before the end of the exam to allow yourself time to do a quick review. Prior to the exam, even before you get to the exam, calculate how many minutes per mark. For example, if you've got a 90-minute exam that's got 60 multiple choice questions, it means you need to allow yourself, on average, 1.5 minutes per question. Now that's very hard to manage that when some questions are more complex than others and some are simpler. So maybe you've got to set yourself targets like 20 marks or 20 questions finished in 30 minutes, 40 marks or 40 questions finished in 60 minutes, 60 questions finished in 90 minutes, and so on. You need to stick to your targets. We all get stuck on questions. And if you do get stuck on a question, do one of the following. If it's a multiple choice question, select a best guess answer. If it's a short essay question, simply stop, move on, and come back to it later if you have time. Stick to your allocated or your target times no matter what. Spending 10 minutes on one multiple choice question is not worth the effort for a single mark. So here's a few tips for the night before an exam. Maybe just do a light read of your study material. Don't try and learn new information. Don't try and learn something new. Review what you already know. You'll make yourself nervous if you try and learn something new. It's best to focus on what you know rather than what you don't know. So don't study new material the night before the exam. Don't try and do any intensive cramming. It's usually too late to be effective and may confuse you, and it may tire you out on the day. Don't do anything out of the ordinary. Stick to your normal routine and make the evening as relaxing as possible. Go to bed at a reasonable hour. Try and get a good night's sleep. Make a checklist of the things you need for the exam: a watch, a calculator, pens, a bottle of water if you're able to take it into the exam. And leave nothing to chance. Put them in your pack the night before. On the day of the exam, make sure you know the time, the exam location, and whatever materials are needed for the exam. Allow plenty of time to get there. Allow for traffic or transport problems. Arrive in enough time so you can use the toilet if you need to. Know where to go. Maintain your focus. That means avoiding conversations with other candidates about how little study they've done or you've done, or how panicky you might be feeling. It only adds to your stress and can confuse you or make you lose confidence. Maintain your energy. Have a good breakfast, perhaps including simple sugars like fruit juice, complex carbohydrates, cereal or toast, and some protein, some milk, some eggs. This will help your blood sugar remain stable, and since your brain runs on sugar, it'll ensure you're running on a full tank. Caffeine has been shown to increase alertness and performance, and so if you're a habitual user of caffeine, be sure to get your accustomed dose. Avoid detoxing or eliminating caffeine from your diet just prior to exams. If it's possible, take along a piece of fruit to eat or water to drink during the exam. This will keep your blood sugar level so you don't slump during the second half of the exam period. So you need to check at the exams center if it's allowed. So here's a few tips to follow during the exam. If you're feeling tense, just relax by taking a few slow, deep breaths. Keep your eye constantly on your watch during the exam. If it's not a multiple choice or objective test exam, read the entire exam before beginning to write. This will help you familiarize and navigate through the exam paper. It also helps to activate your subconscious resources to start finding solutions well before you even start answering the questions. Make sure you complete your details, your name, your student number. It sounds ridiculous, but if we forget these things, you may have just wasted all of the time. Read each question twice, then answer the question. Maybe after the first hour, if it's a 3-hour exam, stretch, eat your fruit, drink some water, and maybe repeat again after the second hour. Remain calm throughout. If you finish the exam before the time is up, review your answers. But this time, read your answers first and then read the question. If you read the question first, you may not notice an error because of your mindset. You'll be led to the same answer you chose originally. But sometimes reading in reverse breaks the set, and you're more likely to notice that you've missed something. After the exam, when it's over, it's now beyond your control, and it's best to put it behind you. If you've got another exam to sit for in the immediate future, shift your focus to that. Try and ignore any discussion regarding the completed exam, as it sometimes can undermine your confidence for the next one. So it's probably not a good idea to hang about talking what was in it or how did you go. You might start doubting yourself and stressing you out. Try and just relax in an environment away from the exam setting. And when you get your results and you've found you've passed, make sure you celebrate. Open a bottle of champagne, go out to a restaurant with your family or friends, and just simply jump up and down with delight. Express it in your own unique way and feel proud of yourself. So now let's have a look at part 2, which is preparing for objective tests. And we're going to go through each of the steps of taking an objective test and try and help you. We're going to do this also by using some sample questions. Answering multiple choice questions or objective test questions successfully will require you to develop a range of skills and exam techniques. So the first part we're going to look at is preparing to pass. As with any assessment, and the objective tests are another form of assessment, the golden rule for success is to prepare thoroughly. It's not unusual for a CIMA examiner to report that some candidates were not adequately prepared for the exam. In many cases, candidates attempt to compensate for inadequate preparation by question spotting or concentrating on a small number of pet subjects. These approaches to preparation are extremely risky and are always strongly discouraged by examiners, for good reason. As each MCQ, multiple choice question, relates to a specific issue within the syllabus, each exam will include broad coverage of the syllabus. This means that to maximize your chances of success, you must have studied the whole syllabus. You may be lucky enough to find a particular multiple choice question is on a topic that was part of your most recent studies, but that probably won't be the case with the vast majority of the questions you'll face. As well as studying topics across the syllabus, it's important to attempt past exams and exam standard questions. Examples of MCQs are available on CIMA's website. Of course, it's essential that you use all of the questions carefully and follow up on all of your answers. Whether a question was answered correctly or incorrectly during exam prep, it will provide an opportunity to enhance your understanding of the topic. By reflecting on why a specific topic is correct, you can improve your understanding. And while reflecting on why the other options are wrong, can help you to overcome misunderstanding and eliminate confusion. When attempting questions as part of your preparation, it's useful to remember that the key purpose of the exercise is to enhance your understanding, not just to get the right answer. When you review each option, it's important to ensure you understand exactly what the underlying point is, and to make sure that you reflect on this to enhance your learning. The amount of time, effort, and discussion that is put into each question before it appears in an exam is likely to surprise most candidates. Every question is subjected to a number of rigorous reviews as it progresses from an idea in the writer's mind to the exam paper. These reviews mean that you need to read the question extremely carefully, remembering that the wording has been chosen deliberately, and this is intended to ensure that the question is unambiguous and does not mislead candidates. An example of the need to read the question carefully might be the way in which a question communicates cost information, for example. It's not unusual for a question to relate to a production period of, say, 3 months, but for fixed costs to be stated as an annual figure. To get the correct answer, candidates must have recognized this fact. This is not an attempt to catch out students, but it's rather an attempt to ensure that candidates can apply the technique in a real-life situation where information must be clearly understood and is frequently communicated in this way. A further aspect is to recognize that the answer will be based on the data included in the question, and there are 2 aspects to this. First, in order to ensure that questions are not too long, the data may have been simplified. And to some candidates, this may seem to be unrealistic when compared to a real-life situation. A particular example might be the way in which labor costs are described in many questions. More often than not, direct labor is described as a variable cost, with no cost to the reference, for example, of laying off staff. For a candidate who's got experience of staff rationalization, this assumption will be totally unrealistic. And while a longer question may provide the opportunity to critically examine the underlying assumptions, this is usually not possible in an MCQ, and the question should be answered on the basis of the data provided. Second, only the data included in the question is required to obtain the answer. That means you should not waste any time wondering about additional data or inferring additional data into the question. An example of this could be a question that tests the ability to calculate the closing balance on a ledger account. The question may give details of transactions during a period and a closing prepayment, but there may be no reference, for example, to an opening prepayment. In such cases, you should assume that this was nil. As already noted, the writer will have sought to keep the question as short as possible by omitting unnecessary words such as the opening prepayment was nil or there was no opening prepayment. It's really important that the actual question, the prompt, that's what we're talking about, the actual question is to be answered, is read carefully. For example, a question may give information on receivables, irrecoverable debts, and required allowances for receivables. And here the prompt, the question, could require any of the following to be calculated: the movement on the allowance, the closing receivables allowance, the charge to the income statement, or the net value of receivables to be reported on the statement of financial position. Rather than actually reading and noting the question, some candidates assume that they know what it is. This is usually on the basis of a question they have seen previously, but more often than not, this approach leads to the wrong option being selected. It's a common fallacy that multiple choice questions are easy, and this is based on the fact that one of the options is the correct answer. Therefore, the argument goes, all you have to do is make the correct selection. And while it's fair to say that some questions may be easy, that is usually because you prepared thoroughly. And hopefully this will happen in some questions, but it's more likely that the answer will not be obvious. So let's have a look at a specimen question. So sample question 1. ABC Co. has a system that records details of orders received and goods dispatched, invoices customers, and allocates remittances to customers. What type of system is this? A. Management information system. B. Decision support system. C. Knowledge management system. D. Transaction processing system. So even a casual reading of the question will highlight that the word system is a key word. It's used in the initial statement that describes the system, it's used in the question, and it's used in each of the choices. This means that unless care is taken to read the question and think carefully about what is being asked, it would be easy to become confused. A further problem is that all 4 of the systems in the choices are examples of systems that might be used in an organization. So to select the correct answer, a good approach would be to consider what each of the 4 systems is intended to achieve. A management information system is intended to provide information to managers. Information is processed data, which is useful for decision making. In this case, the question is referring to unprocessed data and not information. So it's likely that management information is likely not to be correct. A decision support system is intended to exactly what the name suggests, provide information to assist managers to make decisions. Once again, this system refers to information. So on that basis, B can't be the correct answer. Choice C presents a potential problem. A knowledge management system is intended to create, capture, store, and share information. The question notes that the system records details of orders, i.e. it captures it, invoices customers, creates it. And this may create confusion for an ill-prepared candidate. However, a well-prepared candidate will note that once again the issue is that information is relevant to a knowledge management system. On that basis, choice C is incorrect. Choice D is the correct choice because a transaction processing system deals with data, which then is processed to create information. So from this we can see that a student who is clear about the difference between data and information will be able to answer this question without any difficulty. But clear thinking and application of knowledge is needed. So this is a fairly simple sample question. But it's essential that, having read the question carefully, you think about your response and that your answer is the result of a considered choice. This is because of the way in which incorrect options have been constructed. In most professional exams, multiple choice questions have 1 correct option and 3 incorrect options. And the incorrect options are often referred to as distractors. And this term is used because in writing the question, The examiner is attempting to identify the most common mistakes made by candidates and is using them as a basis for the incorrect options. So let's have a look at a more challenging sample question. Information relating to two processes, F and G, was as follows. So we've got some information about a process F and a process G. Questions about process costing. Normal loss for F is 8%, normal loss for G 5%. We've got some input liters, we've got some output liters. And the question is, for each process, was there an abnormal loss or an abnormal gain? So to solve this, we've got to consider each process separately. So let's have a look at process F. Normal loss is 8%. So the expected output is 92% of input. Input was 65,000 liters, thus the expected output was 59,800 liters. But the actual output was 58,900, so just a change of two digits there. As the actual output was less than expected, there has to be an abnormal loss. So if that's true, this means that choices A and B are incorrect, so we could eliminate those. However, a common mistake is often to assume that the performance in both processes is the same. And if you make this mistake, you're going to lead you to select choice D. But let's have a look at process G. Normal loss is 5%, thus the expected output is 95% of input. The input was 37,500 liters, so the expected output was 35,625. The actual output was 35,700 liters. The actual output was more than expected, and so there was an abnormal gain. So now that we can choose the correct choice, C. An abnormal loss for F and abnormal gain for G. Another common mistake in questions like this is to mix up the values for expected outputs and actual outputs. So well laid out workings and a logical approach can help to overcome this answer. As the incorrect answers are based on common mistakes, it follows that attempting to guess the correct answer is not likely to be productive. Rather, it's essential you use your understanding of the topic to work out your answer, and this will prevent you from being distracted by incorrect options. So now let's have a look at sample question 3. At the 30th of June, Barwell Co. is owed a total of 72,660 by customers. Barwell's receivables allowance, brought forward from the previous year, is 11,700. Barwell estimates that the receivables allowance should be equivalent to 15% of the amounts due from customers. What value should be included in the income statement for receivables expense for the year to 30th of June? And there are 4 choices. 2 numbers, 801 and 10,000, and 2 choices, either debit or credit. So how do we solve this? Well, the first thing we might want to do is to calculate the receivables allowance. This is going to be 15% of the amounts due from customers, so 72,660 times 15% will give us 10,899. And if you complete this calculation and then look at the choices, there's a danger because 10,899 is included in 2 of the choices. You might choose one of these. It's going to be B or D. But this ignores the fact that the amount to be included in the income statement is actually the movement in the allowance, which has actually fallen from 11,700 to 10,899, or it's fallen by $801. The reduction in the allowance will be a credit to the income statement. Thus the answer is C. So this sample question illustrates that for questions that require calculations, covering up the options while you work out your answer might be a productive strategy. Of course, with questions that don't require calculations, the possible answers need to be considered in turn. However, this still requires your answer to be worked out, not randomly selected. These questions might require a decision on which one of two more statements are correct, or which one of a number of statements is correct. In such cases, the best approach is to consider each statement in turn and decide whether or not it's correct. Once again, the fact that incorrect options are distractors must be borne in mind. So let's talk a little bit more about eliminating incorrect answers. This approach is likely to be the most effective in questions that require the correct combinations of statements to be selected, and we'll look at an example just in a moment. But consider a question that offers three statements and requires the correct combination of correct statements to be selected. The ideal way to answer this is to consider each statement in turn and decide if it's correct or not. Often, you'll find you can quickly identify one incorrect statement, and on that basis, it's possible to eliminate the options that include that statement, so it cuts down the number of possible answers. So here's a typical question involving statement sample question 4. Which two of the following statements relating to relevant cost concepts, and perhaps you should highlight that, in decision making are correct? Materials can never have an opportunity cost where labor can. The annual depreciation charge is not a relevant cost. Fixed costs would have a relevant cost element if a decision causes a change in their total expenditure. Materials already held in inventory never contribute to relevant cost. So what we're looking for, two of the following statements are correct, and therefore two are incorrect. And with 4 questions, you've got several combinations: 1 and 3, 1 and 4, 2 and 3, 3 and 4. So how would we go about answering that? Well, in this case, a little thought will confirm that statement 1 is incorrect. Through preparation will mean that you know that materials can often have an opportunity cost. Once this decision has been made, choices A and B can be eliminated, leaving either C and D as the correct choice. As statement 3 is included in both of these choices, it doesn't need to be considered. The question now requires a decision on whether choice 2 or choice 4 is correct. Both of these relate to issues in which many candidates experience difficulty. How a particular candidate, or how you will progress from this point, will depend on the knowledge you have brought to the exam, as this will be the basis of your decision regarding statements 3 and 4. Let's consider statement 3 first. The key issue is that a cost is relevant if the decision leads to a future incremental cash flow. Statement 3 effectively says this in the phrase, a change in their total expenditure. A candidate or a student who recognizes this will thus select choice 3 if they are confident about their understanding of the statement. If there's any doubt, or to provide reassurance, statement 4 can then be considered. In this case, if you're well prepared, you'll recognize that if materials already held in inventory can be sold, using them will have a relevant cost. The benefit foregone by using them rather than selling them. Thus statement 4 is incorrect and choice 3 is the correct answer. There are some other points on which you need to make decisions in order to maximize the potential for marks. But for each of these, the exam room is actually the wrong place to make that decision. It's really essential that you've prepared thoroughly and you've decided on your approach to each of the following. Above all else, remember that you should not allow yourself to become stuck on a question so that you run out of time. Generally speaking, exams are drafted so the time spent on each part of a question is in proportion to the marks allocated. With multiple choice questions, however, it may be that some candidates will find some questions are more straightforward than others, and therefore can be answered more quickly. For that reason, as I've said earlier, it may be better to consider the time allocation for a group of, say, 5 or 10 or 20 multiple choice questions, rather than for each question individually. If there's no penalty for an incorrect answer, then there's nothing to be gained by leaving a multiple choice question unanswered. If you're stuck on a question, as a last resort, it's worth selecting the option you consider most likely to be correct and moving on. Make a note, though, of the question, so if you have time after you've answered the rest of the questions, you can come back and revisit it. So from this discussion, you can see that it's not an easy option, multiple choice questions. To maximize your marks when attempting objective tests requires sound preparation. It requires studying across the syllabus. It requires you to practice as many different types of question as possible. They won't all be multiple choice questions. They might be select 2 out of 5. They might be fill the gaps. So there are many different questions, and the CIMA practice objective tests will help you to understand those. Develop your own strategy for different types of questions. Think clearly. Work out your answers and answer all the questions. Taking this approach doesn't make answering multiple choice questions easy, but it should mean that you obtain the marks you deserve. So now let's have a look at the new part of the CIMA syllabus, which is case studies. And we'll look at this by examining the pre-CIMA material. We need to consider the syllabus of the level. We need to look at the requirements, and we need to look at your preparation. Let's look at how we might prepare to answer a case study exam. The pre-CIMA case studies, as you know, are available about 6 weeks before an exam. You should, if you can, download it as soon as it becomes available. I'm going to suggest to you a process that you might follow, which might help you to be more systematic about dealing with these case studies. So let's say you have downloaded the case study. Print 3 copies of the case study and just keep them separate for a moment. And what I suggest you do is take the first copy and read it through uncritically at least 3 times before you start to do any analysis, and leave a couple of days between each reading. And what you're doing is you're letting the scenario be absorbed into you. So when you've read it 3 times, so maybe a week after you've downloaded it, go through copy 1 of the case study with a marker pen and highlight anything that rings a bell with you. Doesn't matter why, just something will say this stands out as significant, or this just doesn't seem right, or this might seem important. Don't be too analytical, just mark those things up. And then wait a couple of days, just leave it lie, don't do anything else, and then maybe with a different colored marker pen, mark up copy 2 in the same way with things that seem significant to you. But don't look at copy 1, just leave copy 1 aside. So copy 2, just look at it again after a few days and mark up what you feel is important or significant or rings a bell or stands out. Again, don't be too analytical at this stage. So we've marked up 2 copies of the case study and we've set them aside. We've not tried to be too analytical at this point. What we need now to do is to have a look at the syllabus itself. I'm going to use level 1 as an example. Level 1 is operational. It consists of E1, P1 and F1. And what we'll see if we look at the syllabus is that the operational level covers the implementation of strategy. So the key word is implementation, as well as reporting on the implementation of strategy. And its focus is in the short term. So here we're looking at short-term things. So when we're analyzing the case study, We're not looking at long-term strategies here. If we're doing a level 1 case study, we're going to look at the implementation in the short term. So that's the first thing we need to note. For each level, there's a guidance on what the level covers. In this case, it's short term. We also need to think about the topic weightings, and you can see CIMA provides for each pillar the weightings for each of the elements of the pillar. So for example, E1, 25% is weighted about introduction to organization. In P1, 30% to cost accounting systems, and in F1, 45% to financial accounting and reporting. So what we need to consider is what's going to be in the case study, what's going to be tested. And what's going to be tested is here. This is the syllabus. So the questions are going to arise a combination of the case study, but in the context of this syllabus. So we need to be very aware, and I'm sure you will be, of what this syllabus is. But we might take it one step further. So what I would do is I would take these elements of the operational level and I'd sort them by the weighting percent and get a sense of what would appear to be the most important elements. And you can see that 45% of F1 is financial accounting and reporting, cost accounting, short-term decision making, organizations budgeting, business taxation. So these seem to be the major things. There might be something about the regulatory environment, but in the context of what is most important, you would, on probability, expect to find something to do with cost accounting systems, financial accounting and reporting, decision making, and organizations. So now, without consulting the copies of the case study 1 and 2, without consulting that now, just leave those aside, take the copy 3 of your case study and mark it up again with things that now seem relevant, having understood that the operational level is about implementation, it's about the short term, and the things that are going to be important are probably going to be the top part. The most important things are going to be the top part of these weightings. So this level is not about strategy, it's about implementing things in the short term, and we can then see which of the case study items you've marked up in copy 3 might relate to the top half of this syllabus. So let's say you now mark up copy 3 and you've highlighted some things, and these things may be quite different than what you did in copies 1 and 2, and just ignore copies 1 and 2, just throw them away. What we're looking at now is these are the things that might fit in to some questions. So now we've got to start asking some questions about the things that you've highlighted. Have I highlighted any issues that would fit into those top 6 categories, for example? So the next thing we also need to be aware of is what is the exam going to require us to do? What we'll need to do is to look at the case study exam requirements that CIMA have provided. We obviously know they're 3 hours long. They include pre-CIMA material and a database of related information and some CIMA material that you'll get provided during the exam. The case studies incorporate calculations, short answers, and essays. And their focus is on either application, analysis, or evaluation, which are levels 3, 4, and 5 of the CIMA hierarchy of verbs. So again, now we need to go and have a look at what these hierarchy of verbs mean. So we need to be clear. Maybe we need to go back and look at these verbs and levels and just again refresh yourself that you understand what the word advise or evaluate or recommend, because these are going to be words that will come up in the unseen questions. We need to also look at what's going to happen with these case studies, and simulated business issues in the integrated case studies provide candidates with the opportunity to demonstrate their familiarity with a context and interrelationship that levels subjects. So if we're doing operational level, then there's going to be E1, P1 and F1. So this reflects the cross-functional working required in the workplace. So in the workplace, you're going to need each of those. And skills will include research and analysis. And when we come to look at the case study, we'll look at what sort of research might I do before I take the exam. And presentation of both financial and non-financial information and communication skills. So now we've read that and we've marked up the case study and we've started to ask some questions, and we might now want to identify more clearly some potential issues which will match the case study focus. And again, CIMA provided you with, at each level, and I'm just using consistently the operational level here, they'll tell you your role, they'll tell you your audience, they'll tell you the question types that you should expect, and they'll tell you the focus. What is the focus going to be? So in the case of operational level, E1 is about the structure of the organization as well as cross-functional communication. P1 is a costing or budgeting issue, and F1 is preparation of parts for an entire financial statement. So they're telling you this is what we're going to examine you on. Now let's see if we can identify some potential issues which match the case study focus. So if we look at our case study marked up 3 now, are there any organizational issues that we've highlighted? Are there any potential cross-functional communication issues? Is there an obvious budgeting or costing issues? Which calculations might be required? And which elements of the financial statements might need to be prepared? So now we've got to match what we've highlighted in the case study with what the case study focus is going to be. So let's say when you've gone through the operational case study, you've highlighted the way overheads have been allocated. It just doesn't feel right. And when you look in the P1 syllabus, a major component is compare and contrast activity-based costing with traditional marginal and absorption costing methods. So you have another look at the case study, and there you see a listing of overhead activities which doesn't seem to be used anywhere in the case study. It's there but doesn't seem connected with anything else. So you don't know for sure, but the probability is increasing that a question might be asked about, for example, product profitability using both these methods. If you have a strong sense of this, then maybe you need to prepare and revise the calculation, for example, for developing a comparison between activity-based costing and absorption-based costing for the products of the case study. And you might want to repeat this process for any other significant issues that you've highlighted. One of the other things that you've got to consider is that you've got to learn to develop playing a role. So the pre-seen material, as we said, is the background for the unseen material, and you've got about 6 weeks to adopt the role required by the case study. CIMA have provided for each of the levels what your role is and what your audience is. So for example, for the operational level, your role is a finance officer, and your audience is a manager or managers and product owners. So we know now that if we use that knowledge, we can consider what tasks in the unseen material might be requested by this audience and how you, as a finance officer or a management accountant in this role, would respond. So we can eliminate. It's not going to be the board of directors that ask you something. You're a finance officer. It's going to be that level of the organization. So when we're talking and preparing to communicate, we need to consider what our role is and who our audience is. So let's conclude this case study analysis by saying that, as in all exams, preparation is the key to success. And you can maximize your marks when you're attempting the case study exams by becoming very familiar with a case study scenario. Imagine you're an employee. Imagine this is a company that you're working in. Become familiar with the role required by the case study. As we've just said, if you're at the operational level, your role is a finance officer. Become familiar with the audience of the role. Think about who is going to be asking you to do something. What sort of things would they be asking you? How would you be responding to them? You need to understand the key elements of the syllabus. CIMA will tell you what is the exam focus for your level. And you need to anticipate the issues in the syllabus which may be present in the case study. But also, be prepared to expect the unexpected in the unseen material. It isn't going to be predictable. There will be some things that are unseen, so that's how life is. Now, CIMA Australia are making some case study films for each syllabus level. So what I suggest you do is to watch these to the level that you're going to take the exam for more insights into case study analysis. So I hope that's been useful for you, and I wish you every success in your exams.